For my money, there has never been a better attacking move than the game Bobby Fischer plays in this masterpiece against Paul Benko. Now, a little context. This was played in the United States Chess Championship that was played towards the end of 1963 and the beginning of 64. This was actually Fischer's last game of 1963. And he won this, spoiler alert, he won the U.S. Championship that year with 11 wins, 0 losses, and 0 draws. Really unprecedented. That could never happen today, even if Magnus played in the U.S. Championship. No one could do that. And in fact, they have a very hefty prize for anyone that does do it. But since no one's going to do it, they know their money is safe. So let's begin. This game played by Fischer against Benko. Fischer has white. Benko has black, and yes, it is the same Benko that the Benko opening is named after. And Fischer begins with e4, and Paul Benko plays g6, or the modern opening. The idea is that you develop the bishop and then decide later how you're going to attack white's center. Fischer takes the center as it's given to him, bishop to g7, directly attacking d4, and now knight to c3. Delaying the development of this knight so he may be able to use this pawn more aggressively and play it to f4 in one move. d6 from Benko. A common idea for black is to play a6 and b5 to unsettle this knight at c3. Fischer plays f4, the sharpest move, or the Austrian attack as it is known, and the idea is to play e5 usually, or maybe f5, and gain space in the center and use that as a spearhead for an attack. Knight to f6, knight to f3, castles, and bishop to d3. Putting the bishop on this diagonal, setting up potential pressure against h7, although if you look at it right now, it looks like that could never happen. His own pawn is in the way, and this looks like a very strong diagonal for black. Very hard to generate activity for white. We'll see how that plays out. Bishop to g4 from Benko. The better move is probably knight to c6, getting those pieces out there. That is the main move, but black has quite a few options. And the move bishop to g4 pins this knight on f3. The problem is the bishop's probably a better piece than the knight, and to take that knight would give white the bishop pair. And Fischer just says, okay, I'm fine with that. Benko takes the knight, queen takes f3, and now Fischer pretty simply has space and a two-bishop advantage. And it's been said that by this point in the tournament, Fischer's reputation was so fearsome that the players weren't playing their best because they were rattled, quite frankly, by Fischer. And this probably was Benko not playing his absolute best here. Here he plays knight to c6. That does attack the d4 pawn. Bishop to e3 simply defends that pawn, and again, the e5 threat is in the offing. So when black plays this way, this sort of modern way, at some point they have to get a stake in the center. Otherwise, they'll just be overrun. And again, the idea of taking this knight, I think, was to enhance black's control of the dark squares, which allows this move, e5, directly putting pressure on d4 and f4. But that's not really a problem for Fischer. So he goes ahead, he takes with the d pawn. Taking with the f pawn was possible too. But d takes e5, and now f5. Potentially opening up the f file for attack. Also, he could just play a pawn storm on the king's side and use this f5 pawn as a wedge and just come in attacking with his pawns. The best response from black here is probably knight to d4, hitting the queen. The queen can go to f2, and then c5, making this knight somewhat strong in the center of the board. Fischer's still better here with the bishop pair in space, but that was probably the best way for Benko to play. But instead, he takes on f5, and this gives Fischer the half-open f-file that he can now use to attack. So queen takes f5, and he's set up now on this f-file. Now Benko plays knight to d4. The queen goes back to f2 as it was attacked. And here he plays knight to e8. The knight can go to d6 here, and maybe he has the idea of playing f5. Now that seems very risky for his king, but perhaps it's a way for him to free his pieces a little bit. Fischer goes ahead and castles. Now the rook is perfectly positioned on the f-file. Knight to d6, and queen to g3 from Fischer. The threats of bishop to h6 combined with the knight hopping into d5 are really bad news for black. These are very powerful ideas for white. The first thing Benko does is he sidesteps the pin the queen has on this g7 bishop. He plays king to h8, and again, maybe he's angling for this f5 move. So because of that, Fischer plays queen to g4. That keeps this f5 square under a little bit of control. If he were to play f5 here, then Fischer would win a piece after a series of exchanges. We can see he would just be up a knight. So queen to g4 keeps f5 under control. And now c6 from Benko to keep the knight out of d5. That knight moving into d5 could cause a lot of trouble. So c6 controls the d5 square, keeps the knight out of it. Queen to h5 from Fischer. And his basic threat here is bishop takes knight, and after pawn takes to play e5, attacking the knight and threatening mate on h7 with queen takes h7. And this is an important pattern to remember as the game progresses. Now, Benko plays a very strong idea. He plays the move queen to e8. The idea is to play f5 while offering the exchange of queens, which would just equalize, basically. And most players would have a hard time dealing with this. Some players wouldn't even notice that that's what black was up to. But Fischer, of course, knows what Benko is doing and comes up with a brilliant plan here. First, he takes on d4. Yes, that gives up the bishop pair, but it's clearing the way for this pawn to advance with threats against h7. So obviously, Benko has to retake or he'd just be down a piece. And then at this moment, let's say Fischer played the most natural move on the board, e5, right? Now he's threatening mate. Queen takes h7. But then black would play this rejoinder, boom, f5. And that's it. It's just an equal game now. It offers the exchange of queens, and basically the only way for white to even keep equality here is to go ahead and exchange queens. We see black is attacking this knight. Of course, white's attacking d6 as well. But so that f5 is an instant equalizer. So that is what sets up this next move. Now, if you've been following the logic as it is unfolded, maybe you have an idea of what Fischer played, or maybe you've seen this position before. And it is at this moment he plays a thunderbolt attacking move, maybe my favorite attacking move of all time. I'll give you a second to guess. Okay, here it comes. Rook to f6. He doesn't care about that rook. Black can have that rook. The only thing he cares about is keeping this f7 pawn from advancing. He knows if he can keep that pawn fixed in place, then there is nothing Benko can do. If he takes the rook, then e5, and that's it. There's nothing he can do to stop mate. He can play a few delaying moves, but it's mate. So the rook cannot be taken at all. So he plays king to g8. The idea is that he can play h6 without rook taking h6 with check, basically. But Fischer just goes ahead and plays e5. And h6 is played next. Obviously, you still can't take the rook for the same reason. He's being mate is threatened on h7, so he has to basically play h6. And then Fischer plays knight to e2. And in this position, only 21 moves in, a very strong grandmaster, Paul Benko, resigned. And the reason is this. This king side is just going to be torn asunder. But Fischer has a couple of threats. One, of course, he could take on h6 at some point, but he's threatening to take this knight. So Fischer's just threatening to win a piece. So black would have to defend that piece while defending his king. So if he takes the rook, then just queen takes h6, right? And there's nothing he can do about the mate on h7. But what if he moves the knight trying to save it? Well, in that case, queen to f5, and now he's lined up on the diagonal, and there's nothing to be done about mate on h7. This is one of the brilliant games in his 11-0 U.S. Championship run. I hope you've enjoyed this game as much as I do. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.